there's a shame that will normally keep this pretty locked in silence. So any leadership out there, women's or men's ministry leadership, pastors that are listening, be open to some of these ideas that we've suggested, and be energetic, be a leader, start creating some of this stuff. Most of all, I think this is going to be a little controversial, but if you feel like right now that you're attending a church that is totally closed to these kind of things, and you have an internal sense that it doesn't always feel safe, then I would just encourage you to be open to perhaps looking around a little bit and seeing if there are safer churches. I'm not advocating any denomination, any specific church. I'm just saying trust your intuition or your instincts about whether the place where you're going to be in regular Christian community feels safe to you or not.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. Today we're going to begin a brand new legacy series called The Characteristics of a Safe Church. You'll notice on these shows we reference the Fight of Your Life event that we just began to present on a national basis back then. So if you're interested in that event, although Mark is no longer with us, we invite you to check out the Fight of Your Life event. It's as a free video series on our website, faithfulandtrue.com. Go to resources and scroll down the drop-down menu and click on the Fight of Your Life. So until then, here is Characteristics of a Safe Church featuring Dr. Mark Laaser.
Randy, today I thought we'd address a subject that's kind of near and dear to our heart here at Faithful and True. In general, I think I describe it as what are the characteristics of a safe church? Now, why this is important to us here at Faithful and True is that, as many of our listeners know, we've entered a season of our vision where we really feel it's important to speak into the local church, to put on our Fight of Your Life events at local churches so that we can open up conversations around healthy sexuality. To open up conversations at the local church assumes that the local church is safe enough to open up those conversations. So I thought today it might be interesting to think through, to think out loud even, and to ask our listeners to even be thinking to themselves about what, in fact, is a safe church.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up for today, Mark, because we're very proud of our new Fight of Your Life events that we just launched in the last couple of months. And I was describing the new program to a friend of mine the other day, and the fact that it was your personal desire to, for years you've been helping men struggling with sexual addiction. And you said to me, what if we were to reach out through the local churches to men before this has turned into an addiction?
Right.
What if we reach out to them and make them aware of the world that we're living in, the culture that we're dealing with, the evils that wait around every corner, and just educate them about sexual integrity and moral accountability? And as I was telling my friend about it, he said, well, I can tell you the main problem is the fact that when you go to church, the local churches don't address that subject.
Yeah, and we hear that feedback all the time. If I've heard that feedback, I'm guessing at least, not just feedback, but complaints that come in here, thousands of times.
If I had heard about this on Sunday
Right.
when I'm attending church,
Right.
my eyes would have been opened. I would have been
Right.
much more sensitive to, being on the lookout for these things. And let's face it, in today's culture, in today's world, you are just a click away or an iPhone swipe away
Right.
from pornography.
That is right. So we're living in an incredibly dangerous time. One of our many theme verses here at Faithful and True is this great passage that Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Don't conform to the ways of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We've addressed that verse from a number of different angles. Today, I would like to address it from the fact that our church's safe culture are part of the unsafe culture, that we're not to conform or conform to. So we're not going to try to get too controversial, but I would just like to really think today a lot about what is a church that is a healthy church and a church that's promoting healthy sexuality. We always like to encourage our listeners to think about these topics. If you're listening to our broadcast as a group, I would encourage you right now to pause the recording and just have a short conversation about not so much the large question, what is a safe church, but maybe this question: when you were growing up in the church, if you did you feel it was a safe place or not? And if it was not a safe place, what are some of the things that you would think made it unsafe? And I'll guarantee you that one of the ones that's going to come up is one I think you alluded to, and that is nobody ever talked about sexuality in the church. It's been ignored for centuries.
And the thing is, there's an audience out there that is eager to be led, eager for information, and both men and women alike. But the men especially are not hearing the message, and this is why the Fight of Your Life events that we're hosting at local churches is specifically tailored to these men sitting in the pews. As our friend Pastor Jay Dennis down in Florida says, it's the pink elephant in the pew that no one is talking about this.
Right. I had a little fun with this earlier today, and I was just trying to come up with what I thought were some characteristics of a safe church. And strangely enough, Randy, I came up with 7.
Okay.
Does that not sound like a good number?
7 is a good number. Mm-hmm.
The 7, I can see a book title, The 7 Characteristics of a Safe Church.
Let me write that down. Okay.
No, this is really particular also to being a safe church when it comes to the topic of sexuality. Not, Larry Crabb, one of our great friends, wrote a book a number of years ago called The Church, the Safest Place to Be. And he talked about safe churches and what that's all about. And I'd highly recommend to our listeners that they pick up that book if they wanted to get into this deeper in a more broad-based way. But for now, let's talk about 7 characteristics of a church, which means that it would be healthy in terms of the topic of sexuality. Number 1 is, and we've already really said it, a safe church openly addresses topics of sexuality. I always like to think about it that even from the front, by the front, I mean the front of the worship center.
From the pulpit.
From the pulpit. And by the way, our current church culture, we talk about it as the worship center, do we not?
We do.
What's the old term for this? Sanctuary.
Sanctuary. Mm-hmm.
What does the word sanctuary mean? A place of safety, safe haven and rest. So maybe that's kind of indicative. We've gotten away from sanctuaries. Now we have worship centers, but I don't want to get off on that subject. I would challenge any of our listeners to think about how often, if ever, they have heard the topic of sexuality addressed at church. In other words, at worship, the worship service, the main deal, whatever it is, Saturday night, Sunday morning, in any kind of Sunday school classes or curriculum, have they heard it addressed?
And we're talking about across all denominations.
Oh, yeah. We're not picking on any denomination now. Because this knows no denominational bounds.
This is a universal problem.
This is a extremely universal problem. So I would say for those listeners, if you're looking for a safe church, particularly in recovery, try to find a church that is willing to address this topic. And one of the ways that you would know the church is safer at all levels would be if, in fact, the pastoral staff is addressing these issues, at least at some point during the normal worship service as part of the message, maybe a sermon series even on healthy sexuality.
Well, and sometimes that subject can be very confusing because you'll see that the pastor is not willing to address that on a Sunday morning from the pulpit, and yet that same church will have men's purity groups.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
It is, because it's a sign of our times that I think that's more of a sign of the need and the want is out there for men to meet with men as an accountability group.
Well, that's right. And it's interesting. It goes kind of back to old 12-step traditions in terms of the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. They would always meet, they set the meeting time after the sun went down. Mm-hmm. So like here in Minnesota, they wouldn't have their meetings until 10 o'clock in July. But that was because they didn't want to be seen going in and out of church.
Exactly.
Or in and out of the building, wherever they were meeting. But it is true that there are a lot of churches who have support groups, but I've seen situations where the church refuses to allow any announcement about that support group to be in the Sunday bulletin.
That's a strange anomaly there, isn't it?
Yeah. Here's one of my favorite stories, and it's time relevant at this point, because next week I'm going out to teach a course at Fuller Seminary and Graduate School of Psychology. It's a combined class. And the title of the class is Pastoral Care and Healthy Sexuality. It is the first course of its kind in the nation. Now, what does that say? If I'm the one, I'm not academically that well qualified or well known, but, if I'm the one that's teaching a course, that makes Fuller very progressive, and that's kind of sad in a way that, that's not going on at a lot of the other seminaries. Now, one of the interesting stories that happened is that when you sign up for a course at Fuller, you're a full-time student or a part-time student, it costs you a certain amount of dollars for every credit you take. Last time I taught 2 years ago, I had some students in the class who were graduates. They had already finished their degree. And I said, "What are you doing in this class?" They said, "Well, we figured that when we did get our degree here at Fuller, this course was not available. And we figured that our education was incomplete because we didn't have any teaching on this subject."
The better late than never.
Better late than never. Well, not only that, but these guys got Fuller to let them take the course for free because they said it was your mistake in the first place.
and Fuller was recognizing that they had a shortcoming.
Yeah, that's right. And so they did let them take it for free. We're talking about the criteria or characteristics that I came up with for what is a safe church around the topic of sexuality. So we talked about the topic is addressed from the front even. Number 2, this is one of my favorite ones, we don't shoot the wounded. That's what I call it. So in other words, one of the reasons that there's been such a silence in the church is because there's been so much fear of judgment, that people will be ostracized, excommunicated. I've talked to hundreds of pastors who weren't able to talk about their struggles early on because they were literally afraid that they'd lose their profession. The consequences morally, judgmentally are huge, and that we feel we can't talk about these things because we'll literally get shot. So not literally, I didn't mean that way, but that there will be consequences. One of the stories I tell, and I can say it with some humor now, although at the time it was very painful. When I crashed and burned, the denominational official in my denomination that was responsible for my care came and visited Debbie and I for about 15 minutes, was totally uncomfortable the whole time he was there, and in effect said, "We'll be in communication with you.
Don't call us, we'll call you."
That's exactly what it was. And so now it's 27 years later, and I'm still waiting for that call.
The call has not yet come in.
The call has not come in. So
I think there is that's a clear indication of the level of anxiety and uneasiness.
Yeah, well, and let me be fair to the individual involved, that he didn't know how to handle the egregious nature of some of the things that I'd done. So, I really don't blame him, but I think it's a wider cultural indication that whether it was back then or it's today, we sometimes don't know how to handle these kind of situations when people get into sexual difficulty.
Well, I think one of the challenging aspects of that many people are not aware of is that our research has shown us that many times the clergy themselves are struggling with issues.
Well, the ones that may seem to have the greatest amount of challenge to address it publicly might be a symptom of the fact that they're struggling with it themselves. Not always the case, so don't.
No, I'm not
beat
trying to point a
yourself up.
finger. Yeah, and neither are we trying to imply that the pastors, across the board, struggle with it. But there are enough.
Yes, that is true. There's no doubt about that. Number 3, Randy, I think that is very powerful is that a safe church will include in even the worship service testimonies from people who have struggled with infidelity issues, sometimes even full-blown addiction issues, and be able to give a brief testimony like a lot of churches do. I know you go to a church where they have a faith story.
Absolutely.
And our church that we go to is the daughter church of that church, and we have faith stories. And actually at our church, there was a time about, 5 or 6 years ago when one of our alumni couples did a faith story, and they told it as a couple. And basically it was a story about how they had recovered from the infidelity, the husband, which at that point mainly included looking at pornography and so forth. I remember very clearly that, when they were finished as a couple telling their story of how God was in the process of healing their marriage and transforming their marriage, they got a very thunderous round of applause.
Well, I would hope so. The thing about a couple sharing their struggles like this, I think that if you format it, it's almost brilliant, in fact, to format it like a faith story, because I think on the surface, the idea of trying to encourage an individual to tell his story or a couple to tell their story of struggle and recovery is a hard sell because of the social implications. They're just so afraid, what is everybody going to think? But when you fashion it like a faith story, saying, here's what we've been struggling with, God is leading us to a road of healing and recovery, I think that makes that scenario much more doable.
Yeah, that's right. I think there is a lot of energy in a lot of churches these days to have more transparent faith stories that involve, testimonies of recovery from, all different kinds of addictions. And we're starting to see that there are some testimonies of people that have struggled with even sexual addiction. Now, I'm not talking just about, some of the great movements across the country around Celebrate Recovery Ministries or Recovery Ministries, where they have a special night where they do praise and worship and somebody tells their story of recovery from an addiction. I'm talking about actually from the front during the main worship services. There have even been examples in the last number of years of pastors who have not so much confessed. It's not like a public confession. It's more a story of how they themselves have struggled perhaps with pornography or whatever, and how God has redeemed their life and transformed their life.
I think when that message comes from the top, it's very powerful in the fact that if our pastor can struggle with this, then the secret I've been hiding in the closet all these years, it's time for me to confront that problem myself.
That's right. Well, if you remember that number 2 about our list of 7 things was that we don't shoot our wounded. I think that if we're hearing from the front that there are testimonies, people being applauded for their testimonies, that it's safe to come forward in the church and talk about your struggles. That is probably one of the key points of all of these 7. That church that is willing to encourage transparency, even from the very top, even from pastoral leadership, I think that goes a long way to saying to the average person out in the pew, it is safe for you to come forward and talk about your story.
After all, none of us are perfect.
That's right. Everyone sins. Everyone falls short.
It's whether you're brave enough to share that information.
That's right, and it breaks the silence that keeps a lot of people locked in shame.
That's one of the key phrases that you and Debbie use around here: break the silence, and because silence, as you say, Mark, What do we say about silence at Faithful and True?
Silence is the major enemy of sexual health.
Absolutely. The number one enemy of sexual health is silence.
That's right. Since we have a limited amount of time, let's see if we can get the final four things.
Oh, I'm sure
in.
you can.
All right. Number 4, I believe that a safe church will have educational programs at all levels about healthy sexuality. Some of our listeners would know that, 15 years ago, I wrote a book called Talking to Your Kids About Sex. And I got myself into a little bit of controversy around how early I think that conversation needs to start. The average person out there thinks that, when a young person finally approaches adolescence and puberty and so forth, that's when we should have these conversations. And I've always believed that there are certain topics that can be addressed, even about physical health, physical development, the differences between boys and girls. These kinds of things are topics of healthy sexuality, and they need to start early. And it reflects the fact, of course, that the average child these days is very computer savvy. They're able to click on lots of things. They're able to do their own Google searches. And sometimes even accidentally, they're going to stumble across pretty explicit sexual material. So if we don't start the conversation with them early on, they're going to be kind of lost in a sea of misinformation that can be out there on the internet.
Well, and to strengthen your point there, we have seen through our Fight of Your Life events, the statistic that early on, or not that long ago, the average age for a child viewing pornography was like 11 years old.
11 or 12.
Yeah, right. And now that age is dropping dramatically.
That is right. And we've certainly had instances here at Faithful and True where a 5-year-old has accidentally stumbled across pornography and then continued to look at it. And the parents are kind of tearing their hair out, about what to do with that. What I'm saying is that in terms of a healthy church, I think the youth leadership, the middle school pastor, the high school pastor, the college pastor, those kind of people need to be prepared to have educational programs about healthy sexuality. They need to teach that from a biblical perspective, a theological perspective, and they need to open up the conversation. So many of the guys that come here, tell stories about when they were in church youth group or Sunday school even, that they wished that they could have had more information, more conversation, and that no one was talking about it. So they felt that they were struggling with these things alone, and that sense of aloneness and silence, like we were just talking about, contributes to the shame, which keeps them locked up in the prison of perhaps even addiction. So one of the things that I think I'm the most proud of in some of the teaching that I've done over the last 10 years is that I teach this course out at Fuller Seminary. And the final project is like a paper. But what it really is that the students in the class, some of whom are candidates for the Master of Divinity degree, some of them are candidates for the Doctor of Psychology degree, they are required to create educational programs for various populations in the church. We could talk just about the youth, but I think the young adults, young couples need lots of education about healthy sexuality. So many young couples get into their marriages and they struggle with this, and no one at church is addressing this for them. We're pretty good at doing premarital counseling, but we're not very good at all at doing postmarital counseling. So I'm saying that all populations of the church, all ages of the church, there needs to be programs developed around these topics.
Well, let's move on to point number 5.
Yes, a safe church, I think, is one that has active support groups for people struggling with, all addictions. Now, it's been very common. Everyone knows that since the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1935, the churches were probably the number one place that hosted 12-step groups. And those groups were usually, as we say, in the basement, downstairs, and you went into them through the back door. And that has changed a lot. And there are certainly, because of the great work that Saddleback Church has done in its Celebrate Recovery program, there are now, dedicated nights in a lot of churches where they come for praise and worship, and then they break off into their individual support groups for a variety of addictions and codependencies. I just think there needs to be more of that, and that a safe church is a place that has resources to send people to. There's a group that meets here for men who are struggling to be accountable about sexual purity. That group meets on Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and you're welcome to attend. We could talk a whole show about this one, but I do think I'm encouraging churches to be open to people who might even want to start such a group. And there are ministries, and certainly we participate with Life Ministries or Life Ministries International now, that has developed material, some of which I've written, that are dedicated to creating Christ-centered support groups in local churches.
Well, this goes hand in hand, Mark, with the standard that we teach here on a daily basis, which goes back to the accountability groups, in which hand in hand, the strength is in numbers,
right,
where men are going to be more inclined to commit themselves to sexual purity when they're surrounded by men that are dedicated to doing the same, encouraging them, creating a call list on your cell phone for those days, right, those nights that you're having a difficult time.
That's right. So I think one of the keys to this is, again, senior leadership, the senior pastor, the head pastor, the preaching pastor. I think he needs to be aware of this, and he also, or she, needs to announce it, even from the front, which basically gives credibility and safety to the program. Said, those of you that are struggling out there with this or that particular issue, there is a support group meeting for that. It meets on Thursday night, and I would invite you to attend.
And if it's presented with enthusiasm and commitment, then in the eyes and ears of the people in the congregation, it's not interpreted with great shame.
That's right. That's right. So, again, I think in the interest of time, we need to move on. We have two final points. Number 6 on our David Letterman list here.
All right.
I know I'm saying it's not a David Letterman list at all. It's actually quite serious. But number 6 is, I believe that churches occasionally, maybe once a year or so, will conduct an event like a Saturday morning. We used to call them men's prayer breakfasts, or a night out for the women, or whatever it is. An event, maybe a 3 or 4 hour event. We're doing, as we've talked about so often, the Fight of Your Life events, which are 6-hour events. But it's a motivational event. It brings speakers into the church and invites men of all ages or women of all ages to come into the church, hear great speakers on a topic concerning, addiction or, certain specific issues. I've come to find that it's one thing to announce in a church that, a support group meets on Thursday night. Well, men may trickle into that. But if we hold an event in which we blow the lid off the silence, and we get several hundred men coming to these events, and we get them talking even during the event about things that they perhaps have never talked to anybody about, the kickoff motivational men's prayer breakfast type of event will really raise the energy level for healthy dealing with these issues in that local church.
And that brings us to our final point on today's show.
Well, I've already kind of mentioned this one, but I think one of the most neglected populations of healthy sexuality in the church is with couples. And I could broaden that and say that I think the average church needs a lot of help in getting a more active couples ministry. We have singles ministries, we have youth ministries, we have men's ministries, we have women's ministries. I think the most neglected population is couples. Couples are the ones that are struggling with these issues, and we need to have events for couples. We need to have support groups for couples. We need to have educational events about healthy sexuality for couples. And I think a really safe and healthy church has really got in mind that perhaps half the couples out in the congregation on any given Sunday morning are probably struggling with these issues. So we need to minister to that. So anyway, that's number 7.
Well, let's wrap up today's show with a call to action from you directly to the church leaders who are hearing us, the pastors who are listening to us, the men who have an influence within their church to take action.
Well, I do think that you, in a way, have just said it, that there's a shame that will normally keep this pretty locked in silence. So any leadership out there, women's or men's ministry leadership, pastors that are listening, be open to some of these ideas that we've suggested, and be energetic, be a leader, start creating some of this stuff. If there's any way that we here at Faithful and True can help you, support you with materials, we have Bible study materials, support group materials. We do these events. We're We're looking in 2015 and 16 for scheduling events like that. So, give us a call and use us. Most of all, I think this is going to be a little controversial, but if you feel like right now that you're attending a church that is totally closed to these kind of things, and you have an internal sense that it doesn't always feel safe, then I would just encourage you to be open to perhaps looking around a little bit and seeing if there are safer churches. This is the controversial part. I'm not advocating any denomination, any specific church. I'm just saying trust your intuition or your instincts about whether the place where you're going to be in regular Christian community feels safe to you or not.
Thank you for joining us today on this series called The Characteristics of a Safe Church, featuring Dr. Mark Laaser. We hope that this has been beneficial to you, and we hope that this subject is one of interest to you as well. And we invite you to visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many additional resources, as well as all of the information about our 3-day intensive workshops. We offer the Men's Journey Workshop every month, and the information and online registration is available on our website. We also have the information about the Women's Journey Workshop and the 2 varieties of our Couples Journey Workshops. So check out all of that information at faithfulandtrue.com. Until then, we hope that this coming week is a week that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.